welcome to another live, fantastic, hopefully, session of Hands-on SAP Dev with me, DJ Q Macro, but more importantly, again, restarting the Art and Science of CAP series, the one and only Mr. Daniel Hutzel. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, welcome.
Welcome back to, I suppose you're part of the family now, the show family. You know, you're a regular on this show, which is great. It's great to have you. It's great to have everybody on the chat here. Daniel and I were messing around. We were fighting with some tools on our local machines just now, so we're a little bit sort of in chaos mode, but I think we're okay now. So good morning, everybody. Rudolph, good morning to you in Ireland, and good morning, of course, to a lovely family member of the show, Helmut in Braunschweig, Brunswick in Germany. Marianne Zeiss, good morning. I'm going to ask you, Daniel, this is behind the scenes. Do you have the YouTube chat window open, or do you want me to send the link to you again?
No, I found it and have it open. So, hello everybody. Hello, Marianne.
Cool.
Hello.
Okay, cool. Exactly. It's always nice to see people chatting. And so one of the things that I like, everybody in the chat knows this, but also Daniel likes even more, is for people to say things in the chat. So if it's just a hello, or a yes, I like that, or I don't like that, or what about this, ask questions, give your opinions. The whole point is this is a live stream, and you know, I'm still in awe of the amazing opportunity we all have to speak with Daniel live. So it's amazing. So good morning to you, Mikhailo in Lviv in Ukraine, and Baba Lunzi, good morning to you in the Schweiz, and Prashant, good morning to you, and AP in, I think, Dusseldorf still, good morning. So without further ado, let's get started. Are you ready, Daniel? Shall I give a quick recap to bring our brains back into action from where we left off at the end of part 6, which was, of course, just in the holiday period. Kumaravel, good morning. A cheerful good morning to you. So where's my there we go. Right, let me just share my screen as well while Daniel cleans his glasses. What am I doing? How do I share screen with this thing? Share. There we go.
Yeah, DJ, maybe you can even extend it to having a quick look at what the sessions, the episode were about so far, so we can pick up.
Yes, exactly. That's what it is. Zoom is requesting to bypass the system private window picker. What do they even mean? I'll just press allow. I don't know. Right. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen. This, and I think I put the link in the chat right at the start of this session. This is the only link that you'll need, this page. This is where we maintain a list of all the parts, all the episodes of this series. This is the thing we're on right now, r_mxs blah, blah, blah. That's the YouTube ID. Click on that, you get to the YouTube that you're watching right now. The notes are pending because, of course, you know, I've not written them up because we haven't even done the episode yet. And so these are all the notes from all the previous episodes. So that's really where you want to go in the morning. Make sure you watch all these replays. We're already at 10,000 views. I think, is it 10,000 views? Just under 10,000 views. I'm going to show my sort of secrets here. 9,702 views already. So come on, people, get it to 10,000 before we hit the end of the week. Anyway, task notes part 6. We had a bit of a whirlwind set of episodes running up to the holiday period. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was Daniel's explanation of activity within the REPL. So we spent a lot of time in the REPL, which was amazing. And I think that also, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but that also was a wonderful way to sort of bootstrap a bit more activity in REPL, the CDS REPL development by Daniel. As we know, Daniel is, a core developer as part of, as a CAP core contributor, as well as, chief architect and BDFL, etc. So we saw 2 new features appear over the course of these episodes. But what Daniel showed us a very brief look at The way that the display of handlers, the actual handler's property in a service, was a lot neater. And why was that important? Why is it important to see that? Because basically, as we have learnt, it's handlers all the way down, it's events all the way down, and our services are the same as the services upon which we rely as CAP developers. For example, the database service and so on. So these are all the handlers that are presented to us in a much nicer, easier to read way. Much neater, in fact, much neater. There we go. I'm not going to go through all the details. You can read this yourself. But basically, another thing that we looked at as a culmination of learning together was how important query objects were. They're almost like, you know, the atoms of what goes on under the surface inside of a CAP service. And these atoms, these queries, these query objects, expressible or constructible in different ways using different forms of DSLs. At their heart, they're just these lumps of JSON, these lumps of JSON. And it's become a lot easier to construct these with all the different features that you can now import with --use, for example, --use QL for references and expressions and so on. But Daniel in part 6 showed how these query objects were also awaitable, and how the thenable concept, which is of course a JavaScript, it's a reification of a more generic concept in JavaScript called thenable, which is basically something that can be executed in a promised chain. Okay, and so this is what is at the heart of how queries are executable, awaitable. So we looked at that, and one of the key things as to why that's important, you know, this is not just navel gazing, how cool it is to use all their amazing features and so on. It makes CAP be a DWIM framework. Do what I mean. You know, I've got something in my brain that I want to happen. Without me even knowing it, CAP does it, and it does what I mean. What does what I want it to do without me even realizing that I would otherwise need to express that explicitly. Anyway, we also, I say we, I mean this is Daniel, but Daniel also looked very deeply in part 6 at remote services. And as I sort of put in here, a nod to who can put in the chat what film this is. Where's that screenshot? What film is this from? There is no remote. The whole idea is that with some amazing ASCII art representation of what Daniel drew in whatever Daniel's drawing thing was, we can see that actually for A to talk to B, to send a query notation, lump of query notation to B, to service B, if B becomes remote, then what actually happens is we get a proxy on the sender end and an adapter on the receiver end, and then that object, that query object, is translated to a this is my term, not Daniel's term, a wire protocol, and sent across. And this is where we got to HCQL, which is, I think it's relatively unknown yet, because there's a little bit of documentation in there. For example, in the release notes of January 2024, it was mentioned, but we understood, I think, a little bit more as to what a remote service really is. And also, let's just go back up here again, because I think this is really important, and also how easy it was to sort of deliberately, where the hell is it? God, I've written a lot of rubbish here. To create a service. Where is it? Machinery. There we go. To create a service and then sort of deliberately stumble through, and feed it the information it needs to find where it needs to connect to. And that was, for me, a revelation as to how simple it really is under the surface. So we had a look at that. Again, Daniel, please feel free to interrupt and correct me, and so on. During the course of that, we also saw Daniel turn debug log level up to 11. there's a film reference in there, another film reference, in two film references in one note. Let me know what that film reference is all about. And we saw how important it is to sort of embrace the debugging. We saw debugging from the CDS-env module here and the CVS service factory and so on. And I dug in a little bit more to that. We also looked at this error that we saw in part 5, and Daniel resolves that sort of live on the stream. We also looked at how queries are sent to the remote service. I've talked a little bit about that already. And we also looked at different ways to provide configuration. I mean, look at that. How crazy is that? That beautiful sort of convention of being able to provide values for properties deep in an object, let's call it an object, by using sort of underscores to replace the sort of the different levels. So that's a really nice way of doing things when you're hacking around. And then, with the knowledge that I've gained from just being a small part of this series, my fingers just wrote that. And that was a bit of a revelation to me that you can do that sort of thing. Anyway, finally, Daniel sort of returns to Capira, to Capire, to the best practices section, and gave us a bit of a summary and a philosophical sort of set of philosophical thoughts on what these best practice topics were and why these are super important to be in the best practices section. And I think that's all I'm going to allow myself to say here. By the way, this is where I am right now. I mean, I'm not literally here where this boat is, where the narrowboat's moored, but that's the name of my boat, Fully Restful. Put in the chat why you think it's called Fully Restful. Yeah, I think yeah, that's the summary I'm going to give. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if I can figure out how to stop sharing it, and ask Daniel if there's anything more that you wanted to add to that summary.
No, that covers it very much. So I was also, in addition, DJ, maybe we can together try to do that. Thinking about, okay, so what did we do in these episodes now, and what should we
Yes,
pick
okay,
up
yes.
else?
So we have you still got those slides, by the way, Daniel? The ones that
Yeah, maybe this is also what I prepared. So if
yeah, I think it'd be good to bring up that slide where you
okay.
said CAP is not this, it's not that, it's not the other, it's not an ORM, it's not blah blah blah. I think that would be
Right.
really helpful
And
to
maybe
talk
the
about
two
that.
of us, because unfortunately the others are not live. But please add in the chat what you would like us to go into, or
Exactly,
what
exactly.
questions you have.
So yeah, so we did this separation of concerns. I wrote a blog post on that as well, and we also looked at how domain modeling and the role of the domain modeler or the domain expert was super important, and how the DSL CDL, okay, let's call it
Yeah.
what it's called,
Yeah.
is possibly the most important glue between the domain expert and the developer. Is that fair to say, Daniel?
Yeah, exactly. And also, so the importance of modeling as being a key aspect of the programming model. Um, there's also this thing, modeling has become an end on its own, sometimes in discussions,
Yep.
it seems, and that is not the idea of CAP. So I like coding, but what does modeling mean to us? It means give us metadata that explains what you intend to do, and we can, based on that metadata, based on that declarative information, do the best we can to automate a lot of things. To me, at least, that's the idea of modeling,
Yes.
declaratively capturing things that machines can do on our behalf, right?
And one of the key things that I learned about modeling with CDL and from aspect-oriented programming, which you explained in one of the earlier parts of this series, was the idea of mixins and the idea of plus the idea of keeping things simple.
Yeah.
So there was a really a good sort of pinnacle of understanding, at least for me, when you explain that actually with aspects, and I mean aspects in the more generic sense, but also aspect in the keyword sense within CDL,
Right.
we have a super flexible, non-object oriented hierarchical way of working in completely disparate, separate teams without standing on each other's toes and without having to rely on somebody changing something for us before we can start doing what we need to do, right? That's a really crap way of saying it, but that was a big thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. It also links us to this slide that we prepared when we started the series, like the art and science of is borrowed, as I shared at the beginning, from that book here, and I like that approach to explain things by looking at the ideas even behind of what we see and use and understand these are ideas that people had which were much greater than we are maybe and this is much about the science parts and this Simon Lewis explains Smalltalk in that way. So what are the key scientific principles behind the things, and the art is how to make it easy to leverage these principles. So
Yeah,
it's always, you could say, it's 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 a quality to find the sciences and then to understand the sciences, and it's another quality to use the sciences and make the sciences available in a way hard to use is no big deal. But making them
yeah.
available in a way that you don't maybe even recognize what you're using. This is, at least that was the idea of Smalltalk in the past, and I try to mimic that to some extent in
I,
CAP.
I think that's a really good point in that for mere mortals like me, like a regular developer, um, I can use CAP and everything that you and the team have packed into the CAP suitcase without opening the suitcase and having to understand the decades and decades of good practices and science from people upon whose shoulders we are standing, or you are standing as well,
Yeah,
and we just use it and it just works, but we don't have to understand the intricacies of how it works or why it works. It just works, and that for me was also a revelation.
yeah. And this may be where I would like maybe to propose, DJ, but help me. We could sort of reiterate or reflect what we touched so far in the sciences part and get some links to
Yeah.
the real part of how it surfaces in CAP, in case we didn't see. And maybe also to mention um, what that means is sometimes, if you are a Java guy, you know about class hierarchies.
Yes.
If you are a JavaScript guy with some Java background, you still stick to classes. While Node is prototype. JavaScript is about prototype system. They even have the class syntax just to please us who love classes, but there's no class actually.
Speak for yourself, Daniel. Speak for yourself.
Exactly. It's just about prototypes. Now, it's for most of us, it's maybe hard to even recognize A, the difference, and B, the importance of the difference, and C, the um, benefits we take out of that. And that's the idea that we drove in CAP. Maybe to just look at that here.
And
Uh,
also, while you're looking for the thing that you're looking for,
yeah,
one of the things that sort of bridges the gap for me between art and science is something else that we covered, which was the difference between using CAP as a framework and using code generators. And
yeah,
this for me was, and the way that you compare, and I think it's in Capire, right? So if anybody can find it in Capire right now in the chat, let us know. I know where it is roughly, but the whole idea that with the Open API, and then you use the Open API generator to generate the equivalent of what CAP does for us, and it was about 400 lines or something compared to whatever.
Yeah.
That was an incredible argument for keeping the code in the framework and outside of your project. Oh, there it is.
Right.
There.
Yeah, exactly. So it's another interesting and important thing also when we automate stuff, we try to automate not just by taking the code out of your site, by generating it into some generator stuff, but we interpret the models at runtime. And this makes a difference very simply in the numbers of lines of code you need to load into memory. We are currently, again, picking up the serverless and function as a service topic. And it makes a difference if you have to load 100 megabyte code or only 10 megabyte code, especially in cold start times. Cold start times is something which is very important when it goes for cloud scalability and elasticity. It means basically scale to zero, as we all know, means you want to shut down all your excess servers in the cluster if you don't need them for an idle period, and you want to quickly bring them up again when there's a peak load coming. And this means your cold start time hopefully is not in the range of minutes, but in the range of seconds or even sub-second. Cup server starts in a very tiny one in less than a second.
Yep, yep. And also, can I just jump in there and say, when you said the number of lines you have to load into memory, I wasn't really sure whether you were talking about human memory or computer memory, because also the number of lines you have to load into your memory are just the lines about the domain, not the lines about the boilerplate stuff
Yeah,
that you have to write and rewrite in lots of other frameworks. And that also with code generators go immediately stale.
right, exactly. This is another thing. I think I added it hopefully to the anti-patterns. Let's search. Yeah, tons of glue
Tons
code.
of glue code.
If you find yourself proudly looking at your 10,000 lines of code and only 10%, so I always ask my people and ourselves and also the applications, whenever, at least in the sample and reference application that we do, whenever we see code, I always ask, why is that line to be written by an application developer?
Yep.
Is that really custom logic? Is that really domain? Or are we talking about technical kind of clue coding here? Clue code is, of course, always to some extent necessary, but it has to be minimized completely and even more utterly technical coding. So you should not, please, you should not deal with things like tenant isolation,
Yep.
security, um,
And
HTTP level service integration of something, because there's so much chances to do things wrong. And with you, you mean, I'm not talking about you. I know several names here, and I know you're very proficient. I'm talking about application development team and scalable application development, about business application, where we have tens of teams of
yeah,
10 who build applications to make money at the end of the day, right?
exactly. That's it's a standard approach, a standard pattern. I think one of the reasons why we build Fiori front ends like we do with Fiori elements is because of this exact same reason. We need to scale the development, and let's not have each individual team building it in their own different way, etc., etc. It's, slightly different,
Right,
but it's related as well.
right.
Um,
Okay, so to not
but
confuse
also that
older
reminds what you
music,
just said reminds me at some point, maybe not today, but in a future one, that reminds me we also need to talk about Khaleesi.
Yes, and yeah, good point. Maybe we come to that. Maybe we pick that today. Yeah, to not confuse all the newbies, I saw also a question. So, what is CUP in the chat? So, I'm afraid I have to link you to the CUP documentation for that because this is not an intro session. We are in episode 7 now, I think,
Oh,
and
I missed that. What is CAP?
yeah, we could still go for maybe one of the session uh, starting from the beginning, but not complete what is CAP.
No.
Nevertheless, what I would maybe do is having this start of the year session to also share this one with you. That is slides I compiled for a meeting with the professors and people from the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Potsdam last week, where I introduced CAP as well. And I wanted
Ah,
to share only a few things because that might be interesting. This is about me. And why is that interesting? Because everybody should meanwhile know that I'm a Smalltalk guy, and Smalltalk has a very big influence on CAP.
yes.
And as you might know, and we shared already, DJ and I, Smalltalk is heavily influenced from Lisp. Actually, Alan Kay, I just read his bio again on Wikipedia. Um, he saw Logo, and Logo is a child's programming language, meant to be a child's
Yep.
programming language, derivative of Lisp at that time. And Smalltalk is very much influenced. So thereby Smalltalk is very much influenced, and now this brings us to the science part by functional programming, because Lisp is our hero language of functional programming. And the most interesting things are in Lisp, of course, as we know, um, yeah, things like pure functions and immutable objects. And why is that important? And why did that become important again after like 1 decade, 2 decades of abstraction? So the 90s were very much about abstraction. You know,
Yep.
even things like model-driven architecture. My favorite model-driven architecture approach about you paint your UML diagrams called the platform independent model, and then you
Yeah.
press a button and a code generator, um, generates tons of platform-specific model, as they call it,
Yes.
which is your code, which hopefully works. This approach was proven decades after decades to not work.
Yep.
And they just did it again to just prove it didn't work still. So don't believe these kind of things, please, anymore. Now,
I recently listened to a podcast episode interviewing Bob Martin, and he was basically saying this, admitting the same thing.
right. Yeah, model-driven architecture was before called CASE, computer-aided software engineering. And there's a nice article, maybe it's even Bob Martin, that explains something about, well, CASE proved to not work. It was a nice idea, would have been great
Yes.
if, right? But yeah, magic happens here, never works, right? Um, yeah. So we had this time also in the 90s, and I was very deep in the Java camp in the 90s for 20 years. Did an object relational map on my own there, built an application framework using Hibernate, um, building a lot of things. By the way, I also did something which nowadays is called CQRS, Command Query Responsibility Segregation. If you don't know it, read it. It's good. And you can do it, and I would promote to do it. Well, what we did is at that time, we've also figured out using the same approach for writing data than for or modifying data, the command part, and for querying data is not the best idea. So we did two different ways. Reading data was done differently than writing data. We did querying for reading, and we did, in that case, Hibernate, object relational mapper kind of things, only for writing, not for reading. Yeah, these kind of ideas are important. And why back to Lisp, we saw a renaissance for Lisp and the ideas of Lisp, of functional programming, basically when Google came up with big data. In the need to efficiently process loads and really huge loads of data, you have to have better ideas than, well, it's all just an object relational mapper thing, right? And we saw things like MapReduce that
That
everybody
reduce, yeah, yeah,
likely knows.
beautiful.
And what is MapReduce? It's basically you have a big load of data, you have to process one row, what each of these rows in this data. And instead of processing one after the other, you put it into chunks and distribute the load. That part is processed by this processor, the other part by the next processor, and all collect the results. And then you collect only the results and reduce it to the combined result. That's the idea of MapReduce. What it needs, the assurance and the proven assumption that whatever happens in processing these chunks of data is side effect free. So immutable data and functional programming guarantee side effect freeness. And this is why functional programming came up again, and functional programming still holds true. And you find it in CUP as we briefly touched it in these best practices of services are stateless and data is passive and in varying shapes. And by the way, I just recently read an article of a colleague, a very good colleague of mine, uh, SAP material about domain-driven design, where there is this bad practice of don't do anemic business objects. Anemic meaning business objects which just hold data records and no behavior, no business objects. And you know what I say? I say, don't believe him. And he says, don't believe me. So it's on you.
Just tell him to go and watch everything Rich Hickey says.
Exactly. Yeah. So cup objects are anemic, and we really ask you, please accept this, because if you don't have anemic objects, if you add behavior to data, then you need this data to be instances of a class that declares these methods. If the data always has to be instances of that class that are not anemic, then how would you read this data in a different shape that doesn't fit to the shape foreseen by this class? Number one. Second number is, and when you transfer this data from your server where your classes are living to a client, a consumer, which is maybe even implemented in different programming language where your classes cannot be restored, how would you have non-anemic objects there and pass it along maybe to another consumer? So this idea of class-oriented systems is, I would say, we we did it.
You
Everybody of us,
tried it.
I think, did it heavily in the 90s,
Yeah.
but these times are gone.
Would it be fair to say that it would also be more difficult with class-oriented
Yes,
approaches to do abstraction, to do late binding, everything like that?
right. Late binding and most importantly, aspect-oriented programming.
Yeah.
With classes, there is no aspects. It's hard. You can also add aspect-oriented programming framework, but it's always something that you have to tweak into something that acts like an obstacle to this idea, the class system, while it's basically the base idea of a prototype system. So maybe let me show what a prototype system in a sense is in REPL here.
Oh,
And I
sorry,
need
Daniel. Usual
exactly.
request. Thank you very much.
Okay. So what is that? Um, say, yeah, say foo should be a class and it should have an element bar, which is the value 11. And it should have a method because we like methods. Um, foo. and it returns foo. So, and foo would be a new foo.
New foo.
And if I say foo, I see already foo has a bar, and I can also call foo foo, and it would return who. And I can create a new class bar. And have a bar and to be a new bar, and the bar bool would also be who. And then I can override bar and stuff like that. But what I want to show is, and what I can always do, I can add an aspect to foo, even if I'm not the owner of foo. If I have access to the definition of foo, I can just add a new behavior, a new aspect to foo, like foo prototype. And this is where prototypes come in. Prototypes move says, oh, I have to go like that. And so should be also available for bar now, because bar is an instance of bar, which is a subclass of foo, and I late extended the definition of foo and should work. So let's try. No, I'm not a cow.
Yeah.
And that is not the end, because a prototype here is what the class prototype is about, and foo happens to be a derivative. It's actually not an instance of this class. There is no class in JavaScript. It's just a derivative of this foo prototype. So you can look at the proto of foo, which should be foo prototype, if I'm not mistaken.
Is it fair to say that, yes, is it fair to say that this stuff, this class stuff that came in the ES6 is quote unquote just a syntactical layer over the top
Exactly.
of
Exactly.
what already was there?
Right. And this also reflecting the idea of a prototype system. Everything is just a prototype. Objects have prototypes, and and share all from the prototypes and can override things. So the same idea as in classes, overriding inheritance, but just for object instances even. So let's look at that. I can also just modify foo and say I add a new property, some numbers of x to be 9, and let's see what bar is. Oh no, bar is not the prototype. Sorry, I must be taken. Yeah. What I can do as well is having, say, a car, and that happens to be a thing that has foo as a prototype. Oh, sorry. And therefore, I should be able to see the access of car because that instance. So it's just about prototypes. Why did I bore you with that?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, it's yeah, important to understand if you really want to understand what CDS is about. So if I have a model like that here, yeah, let's look at the schema of the bookshop that we all know. And if I go into my Rebel and
Always a minor version ahead of us. 8.8. I put this in the blog post the other day,
of
the
course,
last part. Yeah.
I show you also some things that I just added there. Yeah, so this is our reflected model. And if we look at this model, so CDS model, it is a linked season, as we know. And as we know, we can inspect it with depth 1 or depth 0.
For those who have not seen the previous parts, this inspect function, along with another function, is an additional function that was added to the CDS REPL over and above the standard JavaScript REPL.
Yeah. So this is our reflection model that we loaded from these sources. And the most important part is definitions. By the way, there's also no namespaces. If you see these namespaces, ignore it. It's not meant for you. We will make it public and document what it's meant for. But for the time being, don't try to understand it. Definitions is for you because that is documented. And what is not documented, again, I stressed this several times, don't use undocumented stuff because it's our joy to break your code next major
Yeah.
release.
So
We have
talking of
to.
link definitions, sorry, before we move on, Daniel,
Mhm.
I think I wrote a blog post about this. One of the, to use the word aspects, one of the aspects of link definitions is that they're iterables.
Yeah.
And I think talking about what is important to learn about generally, over and above, the prototype system in JavaScript, for example, which is more academic but also super fascinating,
Mhm.
is the concept of the concept of iterables and the iteration protocol, which is within JavaScript, and how to deal with iterables, for example, using destructuring.
Yeah.
So I'll put a link in the chat to when I find it to what I've written about that. But I think it's super important, right, Daniel?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also just, because cup means to be easy and reduce the amount of glue code that you write. You find these kind of things every now and then, like the introduction of link definitions. What is it? This CDS model definitions is an object, a map in Java or a dictionary in Smalltalk of all the definitions in our model by name. And you can exactly, DJ, as you said, for example, destructure that object using the destructuring operator to get, for example, the definition of user and the definition of currency with this object destructuring thing, or just accessing by name, of course. Currency equals CDS model definition, which is the most common use case that you access things by name from this map. But every now and then, I found we have to loop over all definitions, and this is why we turned this object CDS model definition into an array lookalike. So it also feels and looks like an array. And this is by the, as DJ mentioned, the destructuring operator, where I can say, hey, I destructure it as an array and I want the first entry and the second entry.
Yeah.
I don't know what they are. And here we have the first and the second to be currencies and currencies test. Yeah, and you can also loop over this using the common for loop operators.
Yeah. For in and for of.
Exactly. For in and for off, exactly.
I think one of the important things for people to know as well is it was in a recent minor version, maybe a 7 dot something version, you explicitly and deliberately removed some of the expected usual suspect array methods functions from the link definitions because for me it felt too much like an array.
And it got in conflict with named properties of these things. This was just a mistake that we went too far to making it an array lookalike.
Yeah, yeah. No, let's embrace it for what it is.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, yeah, but now maybe back to to this level here. So yeah, prototype system means basically if you want to add something to a definition that you want to reuse, maybe a reuse definition that you want to reuse all over the place of your models, like uh, our managed
Aspects.
objects here,
Yeah.
and we showed this in the in the aspect-oriented guide. So that's quite common. And I see also many of you reusing our CUID aspect from sub-CDS common. So we have the managed aspect here. It just says all your objects should be change tracked by a created by, modified add, modified by. And the CUID aspect says all our objects or definitions should have the uniform way of being identifiable by a primary key. And you use these things, I have seen, and many projects use this. I have also seen projects that don't like our idea of managed, but at least want to add something. So, like, for example, some want to add the equivalent of commenting what changed
Yeah.
by which user. And what I showed in the aspect-oriented programming guide, wherever you are and have access to our definition, you don't have access to our source code, but you have access to the definition that you load from our source code, you can do something like that. Extend this managed aspect with some new fields, right? Like my favorite name besides foo is boo. So now all our objects that inherit from managed also have this property. And what you can also do, just for fun, is you can create a new entity wherever you are, of course, like saying, I want to have a change list, a list of changes. And it should be something like the key is an ID, a UUID, and to delete it, and it has a timestamp, and it has a user who did the change, and it has a command that the user could enter to describe what he did, like our git commit messages.
Yeah.
And what you can now do in addition is you can, let's just have this a string for the time being here. Instead of adding a boo, you can add something like my changes and say, and I want that to be a composition, so a new relationship to whatever entity inherits from managed should get a new relationship to our central entity change list. And that's it. And yeah, the up pointer is important here. I have to add like the parent, the foreign key from a to many association back to the like authors here. So what is the up pointer from changes to authors? It's something like author should be an association to authors. That would be the most usual way. Now, but books also inherit from managed, as we see here. So, yeah, I need another one for books. And of course, you already see that doesn't work because we don't know what parents managed could have. We are talking about we would need a polymorphic association here, right? To authors or books or whatever comes up, which I don't know today.
Yes.
That is the most important thing. And I always think about that when you do CDS and CUP modeling and definitions. The core idea is you don't know what will come in addition. If you know, then you're lucky. Then the only job you still have to do to be fine is stop time. Because when time goes on, something else will be added. Yeah, watch the video and the session of Rich Hickey, by the way.
Yeah.
Are we there yet? Has
Are
to
we
do
there yet?
with time. Yeah, so what is the association that we could use? Well, there's none, but we could do something like parent and say, well, if we would assume every parent has a primary key, then we could go for that. And the primary key would be a UUID. Well, it would work for those having UUID. Bad luck, we chose an integer here. Well, another one could be string, a bit better. Even another one, and this is why I walk you through this, is take this into an aspect. Let's say you have a composition of many change lists, and you're done. What we have now is this one is a composition to an entity that should have the shape of this aspect. But the entity is actually added by the compiler, and I can show you this. Oops, sorry. So it's this thing here, preview as YAML gives you all the definitions that we also saw in runtime just a minute ago. I want to collapse all this. And what we see down here is that we have these new entities, subcapire bookshop books changes. That comes from, I have books. They inherit from managed. Managed says, everybody who's inheriting from me should have this changes composition, which is a composition to an entity that inherits from change lists. And that is exactly what we create. We take the name of the entity, the name of the composition, association, and that becomes the name of the new entity. So subcapire bookshop books is the entity, changes is the composition name, and this is a new entity added, and it has the elements ID timestamp user comment, which is here, plus, and this is an ugly name which shows the parent pointer. And that is actually a polymorphic association because it's a different one for each of these things. The other one, authors, has a element which is a parent pointer, which is an association to bookshop authors, while the books changes entity pointer is an association to books, specifically the ID there. So that's the thing about this managed composition, and also the thing about aspect-oriented modeling and about the power that in this sentence that sounds like a slogan, but it's really meant very serious. You can extend everything that you can get access to, whether it is your definition or somebody else's definition, or even your framework's definition. So CUP in that case, manage this from us. And whenever you extend it, this extension will apply to whomever in your world, in your universe of discourse, the Lisp guy said in the past, is using this definition, in that case, authors and managed. So this happens to be in the same file, but you could also put it in some other file. You could also put it in some other file, in some other project, like a CUP plugin, and then load this CUP plugin, and it will give all your managed objects the ability to be changed without even you adopting that. If you adopted managed, then you get this for free. And this is, for example, how the change tracking plugin, by the way, developed not by us, but by an application team in the ERP camp, is built. It just uses CUP, aspect-oriented programming, to extend something. Okay, so we are very much in forward in time. So we again looked at that. We touched a bit this one. I already talked about this hexagonal architecture, and maybe DJ, if time permits, I would maybe try to
Sure.
give a present for you homework. And I just came to my mind, sorry, because I looked at the thing.
Of course. While you're looking at
Yes.
for that thing, oh, hello. Oh, is it something I sent you?
No, it's something I sent to you
Oh,
about this query stuff, schema.
ah,
Maybe you do the closing words while I look it up.
yeah, sure. I mean, in fact, the closing word, in addition to the closing words, I just want to point out, and maybe other people were feeling the same as me, when you started to add that parent of the change list and used a reference to the books and to the authors, I was having a really bad feeling, thinking, "Oh my God, all my understanding of the beauty and philosophy of CAP has gone out of the window. I just completely don't understand it." But then I realized that you were showing that as a bad example. It
Right.
reminded me a little bit of the feeling I get when I see a function that modifies a value outside of its scope, as in a non-pure function. It's almost the same sort of
Right.
thing. It's like,
Right.
oh, gives me a horrible feeling, a bad smell, as it were. One of the question was as well in my mind, that change list aspect. Could we have also defined that as an anonymous aspect in line, as it were, instead of having it as an explicit aspect? Now, of course, that would restrict us in being able to have that in a separate file, but anonymous aspects are also a thing, right?
Yes, exactly. So what we saw here was a named aspect change list, but can also go for the anonymous,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
time does allow to do that very quickly. I just decided, just have to close this one here.
sure.
And
And also, while Daniel's getting that ready as well, I put a link in the latest thing I put in the chat, which is a URL, not the Rich Hickey one, but the one before that, is about flattening the hierarchy with mixins, which I wrote about from the first part of when Daniel showed this, a little bit of a different version of this. So have a look at that one.
Mhm. So the anonymous aspect is just you take the body out. So what is anonymous? Anonymous doesn't have a name, as you know, right? So this is the name of the aspect. So it's a named aspect. And an anonymous one is just the definition of the aspect. The aspect is, in essence, is this curly braces thing.
Yeah,
And
that
whenever
block.
you see this curly braces thing, think of it's an aspect. Um, yeah, and this is the same with an anonymous aspect,
Cool.
just inline. Yeah, about this thing here, I found it, and this goes to another science
Ah,
thing.
yes.
Relational model and relational algebra, as you might know, is far more scientifically proven than CAP. And whenever we do something, we try to check and validate if we are on the right track by looking at some sciences, which collect a lot of experience of humankind, basically. Um, and this was one thing that we did. We tried to check, is our idea of CDS, and more importantly, the CQL part, so the extensions we do in CQL, remember it's nested projections and path expressions along associations. That's in essence the extensions of CQL.
Yeah.
And we try to validate whether this is a true thing by doing something like that. What we see here is a reuse of these books. I need to store it somewhere. I don't do it. So you import from the bookshop the authors and the books. And then you define an entity called schema. I can also give you a hint.
Ah, yes.
Don't try to look up this annotation. I just invented it. It doesn't exist. Everybody can add annotations, you know. Um, Now I do something like this. And
That's
then
yes.
what I did with DJ, I would just share this mail then. And now I can load this in my bookshop and run a query like that and a query like that.
I had to go and lie down after I got this email from Daniel.
And what I would be interested, so you can still watch the next episode without having done that. But I would be interested if there are some people who are interested in trying out what this does and
Oh,
then
yes.
finding out what this means to us. Um,
That's a brilliant cliffhanger to end on, Daniel.
right. And think about relational model. I encourage everybody to read something about relational models.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. That's your homework for the weekend and the week before. I think we should get together again the same time next Friday. Is that okay with you, Daniel?
Yep, that's fine.
Perfect. So we'll see you around next Friday. Thanks everybody so much for watching and the comments and everything. I learned again, just like every time, an amazing amount. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody. And have a great Friday and a great weekend. And we'll see you soon. Bye for now, folks. Say bye, Daniel.
Bye bye. See you.